like and subscribe. Pretty please. For those of you that escaped cults, what was your I need to get the fuck out story? Not me, my mother. She used to go to a church/college up in New Jersey. Not gonna name any names here, but a cult nonetheless. No music, aside from Christian radio, strict dress codes, etc. She knew they were bad, but she realized she needed to get fo when the preacher went up to the podium and mentioned offhand that while wrong, Jim Jones had a good point. This was in the 80s, mind you. Right after Jonestown. Churches fused with colleges are fucking death traps for college freshmen. My cousin and I talking on the phone when we were 16, and he had just gotten diagnosed with cancer. We were Jehovah's Witnesses, and they don't allow blood transfusions to live. Trent was going to need blood transfusions. I can still hear him saying, "I don't want to piss off Jehovah, but I don't want to die. I'm just a kid." And all at once, I went from being a good little JW kid to only doing what I absolutely had to. Because I still lived with my parents. Two instances stick out to me. Although I was just a child, my family was very involved, and we didn't get out until I was a teenager. My mom is still a member. 1. My first time sitting in a crowded room while the elders or leaders of the group publicly announced someone being disfellowshipped or excommunicated, meaning they did something wrong, and nobody was allowed to speak to them until they were reinstated. I just remember feeling so sick for them. They were publicly shamed and humiliated, and their family was also treated poorly. Usually, everyone knew about their perceived wrongdoings. Even as a little kid, it just seemed so wrong to me. Shouldn't we have been extra supportive and loving to people when they were struggling with bad choices? Shouldn't we be encouraging? It felt so gross and cruel. I knew then something was wrong. But I was only about 5 years old, and if you questioned anything it meant Satan was putting lies into your head, so I always just kept my mouth shut. If you tried to get out, you'd be shunned too, and lose everyone you loved. 2. When I was 8 years old, struggling with my parents' divorce, and my dad's subsequent exit from the congregation, and an older family member sat me down and told me that if I wanted to have a dad, I needed to convince him to start going back to meetings and being a good member of the congregation. Otherwise he would die at Armageddon and I'd never see him again. What a fucked up thing to tell a child. These are just the two biggest instances that come to mind, but I have a whole lifetime of trauma from my years in the cult. I used to be in a group called the Grand Old Party, but after watching the leader brag about sexually assaulting women, insult fallen members of the military, pointlessly repeal protections for the environment, push xenophobic policies, engage in any/every petty dispute available, continually praise dictator despots, spend his work hours pushing baseless conspiracy theories, and attempt to scale back testing during a worldwide pandemic, I began to subtly think that I may be a part of a cult with a death drive and a leader intent on driving the entire group straight over a cliff. Former Jehovah's Witness, the way they treat people who aren't in the religion, and also how they treat people who do get excommunicated, reminds me of a life hack. If a Jehovah's Witness comes to your door, say you've been excommunicated, and see how fast they get further. Former Mormon, and when I was about 13, and couldn't get any satisfying explanation as to why women couldn't hold the priesthood, i.e., have any position in the church above a Sunday school teacher. Everything we learned and did revolved around becoming a good housewife. I used to get in arguments with my young women's teachers all the time. Why can't I hold the priesthood? Why do the boys get to pass sacrament? And why can my only contribution be to make the bread? I never got any good answers and eventually stopped going. It was just a year or so ago I contacted a lawyer to get my records removed from the church. They wouldn't leave me alone. It was insane. I would call the bishop and he would say they would leave me alone. But it was single ward, so the Bishop and Relief Society president changed every few months, and it would start again. My parents and siblings still practice. But fuck that noise. I'm doing much better on my own. And as someone raised in the church, I would say, if it's not a cult, it's damn near cult-like. All money earned is tithed at 10% from the moment you start getting money, like birthday money. When I was in the single digits was all tithed. Men were the holders of power, and women were expected to be good little housewives. Clothing had to be modest. Dresses and shorts had to go to your knees, tummies cold and show, and your shoulders had to be covered. The church was your life. So many hours on Sunday you had church, then Monday nights was Bible study, then Wednesday was youth activities with the church. Once you got to high school, every morning before school was seminary. Your life was the church, not just Sundays, but every day. All my friends and family were Mormon. And I didn't make friends outside of the church until high school because it was such a tight-knit group. It's just bizarre. The things I grew up thinking were totally normal. Went to a church that had a night where a faith healer came to visit. He healed a teenager of very severe asthma as a sign of his faith. The teenager goes out on the bike trails without his inhaler the next day and almost dies. The pastor visits the family in the hospital and tells the heartbroken parents it was because they didn't have enough faith. And with that, I exit stage right. I say that because that's when I realized the whole thing was an effing show. Christianity is so messed up sometimes. It would be so much better without cults. The thing is, in Christianity, these stuff are okay. In Islam, my religion, it's not. In Islam, the Quran said there'll be no more prophets to prevent these kind of stuff. I didn't escape so much as avoid a cult, but I'll answer. When I met Julie, she and I were both young college-age students. She was a little bit spassy, a little new agey, but hey, it's Morley. It's hard to find anyone here that isn't. And despite that, she seemed smarter about it than most people, even about most skeptics I've known. She used to do some meditation and had some little Hindu deity images and stuff. And she explained to me, in sort of an embarrassed way early on, that she didn't really believe in the stuff and felt silly about it, but she felt like the meditation helped her and that the trappings of the belief system helped her to keep it up, sort of in the same way that runners having a morning routine helps them to get out the door for that morning run every day. Her routine helped her to keep up this habit that she found helpful. Now, the fact that I'm describing all this in past tense means you're seeing it with that wonderful clarity that hindsight brings. But at the time, the craziness of her beliefs were completely shrouded. We transferred off island to a different university together. We moved across the country and back together. And we lived together for another 6 years after that. 11 years together in total, before I found out that she was in a cult and had been since before I met her. I won't say there weren't any red flags. She could be remarkably stubborn about some surprisingly odd things. The one that jumps to mind immediately was when some radio show brought up the issue of human cloning, and she insisted that there was no reason ever to do it. I disagreed and said that it could have medical benefits that didn't simply result in organ harvesting from a captive, living host, or something horror movie-esque like that, and she insisted that she would never see it as worthwhile, no matter what. Just weird stuff like that, with no context. During our time together, I wound up working at a hardware store to pay bills, and injured my right eye in such a way that I have permanent double vision. It has become a struggle in my life, but it's one I work around and try to make the best of. One night, at about 3:30 am, I woke up in my dark bedroom with something warm on my face and the sound of chanting, not like demonic growly chanting like you hear in the movies. It sounded closer to someone trying to sing along the falsetto part of an 80s song on their headphones, where you just hear their awkward voice and not the music that goes along with it or the tune that they are trying to match. It was Julie. And she had her hand on my face, chanting an invocation to the medicine Buddha. Yes, the medicine Buddha. My girlfriend of 11 years was trying to cure my eye with faith healing. So I tried having an early morning talk with her. It turns out she believes she's successfully done this before, healing an injured bird that she found. Let me tell you the story of that bird. She found it outside her home, and it was clearly sick or injured. She put it in a little box, but didn't bring it inside, because our cat would probably not help its health. She would give it food and sit outside with it, and I found out later that she would similarly chant over it. One day she woke up, and the bird was gone, and you think you healed it and it just flew away. What else could it be? I rattled off a list. Maybe the neighbor's cat found it in that box. Maybe its normal biological processes healed it, and it took off. Maybe a neighbor kid found it and took it home. and convinced his dad to take it to a vet. Maybe our landlord found it outside and got rid of it, etc etc etc. She wouldn't hear any of it. And that's when she told me the whole story. When she was younger, she met a dude named Mark, online, of course. Mark made her feel appreciated, which she didn't at home, and invited her to visit him in Toronto. When she got there, it turned out Mark is a key figure in a religious group. His grandfather is the leader of said group. I think his biological grandfather, though I'm not sure on this point. And Mark himself channels the voices of the deities. Julie told me that she herself had witnessed him channel the voice of the deity responsible for the creation of humans, and she was utterly convinced. What's more, the group has a mission. You see, the deities speak to them through entertainment media, primarily movies and such, which I mean, why bother when you have a kid who can channel your voice directly? But what do I know? Anyway, what they've informed the leader of is that China is working to develop a soulless clone army. That's why she was so against cloning, and that they would use this army to take over the world. The group was set to be the resistance against them, and the ones who would rebuild after this apocalyptic war. She told me all this thinking I would be grateful for finally hearing the truth. Instead, I tried to talk to her about critical thinking, and she wouldn't listen to any of it. She could not believe that I wasn't even considering the truth of what she told me, and basically shut down completely. We went from a mostly happy ordinary couple to complete strangers in 2 days. It was wild. We broke up very shortly after that. I couldn't be with someone who exercised no critical thinking at all. And she, apparently, couldn't be with someone who exercised any. Julie went on to sabotage the budding relationship with the woman I started dating afterward as well, using my old passwords, which I'd never told her, but she had snooped out to access my accounts and invade my privacy. So yeah, I lost 11 years of my life to a real winner there. I think what you'll find with a lot of ex-cultists is that there is often not one singular "I need to get the fuck out" story, although I know for a fact that those stories exist, no doubt, but I think for most it was a cumulative process of slowly waking up to the bullshit. We use a phrase in the ex-Mormon community called putting it on your shelf. That is, when you're a believing member faced with information that contradicts or threatens your belief system, you put it on your shelf, knowing that answers will be provided in the next life. Problem is, once you put enough items on that shelf, it eventually breaks, and you finally break out of the intense mental gravitational field, cognitive dissonance, that kept you believing in it for so long. For me, the item that finally broke my shelf was waking up to the reality of how toxic the Mormon Church's teachings on sexuality and sexual purity were in my life. I can literally attribute a decade of my life of experiencing severe mental health issues directly to the intense guilt and shame the church encouraged me to have. I think that until the cult affects your life in a personal, undeniable way, it is extremely hard, if not impossible, for believing members to accept or even acknowledge any form of logical argument/evidence that their organization is bullshit. Only until I woke up to how the Mormon Church had such a negative impact on my life was I even open to accepting the mountain of evidence that the church was a sham. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. Oh, and don't drink the Kool-Aid.